And, well, the last presentation is going to be given by Mr. Luis Miguel Pastor. He's a professor of cellular biology, and he's the chairperson of these. He's a professor of cellular biology, the president of the Spanish Association of Bioethics and Medical Ethics, and he works at the University of Murcia. And he's going to be talking about the ethical perspectives in the case of pedagogy related to natural fertility awareness. Well, firstly, obviously, I have to congratulate the organizers for this event, which I hope will have continuity. And secondly, I would like to thank you for inviting me so that I can explain something on this issue, which in part, well, I've thought about on certain occasions. But the first premise, well, the first part has to do with initial considerations on how to teach these natural fertility awareness methods. And the basic premise is the suitability of these methods and their adequate use. In relation to this, I have nothing else to say. They are perfectly permissible. And secondly, I'd like to talk about some of the aspects of this education, of this teaching. I could give you many more. And thirdly, I would like to say that what I think I'm going to be talking about here is something that is intrinsic and which is related to the educational task itself. These are not things that come from outside, but rather come from inside this teaching action. And finally, a corollary would be the possibility of being able to address all of these issues more extensively. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk about what I believe are the specific premises that have to do with the convenience of these methods. But it's clear that there are two issues here in a married couple that summarize everything. One of them is love, and the other one is fertility, and fecundity. And it's not only from a biological perspective, but also from the point of view of the education of the offspring, which actually forms part of this fecundity, of what has already been mentioned, of the us that is extended. But of course, well, this has been achieved thanks to mutual consent from the spouses, and at the same time, this is something that requires growth that was mentioned a couple of minutes ago. And, well, when there's fidelity, you grow. And if you deny them, that marriage is not going to grow. And both elements are inseparable. And I like all this about mutual interiority, or perhaps some of you know about these terms. But what I mean to say by this is that one is inside the other. And so I've imagined how I can present this, but in any case, it needs movement to be presented in such a manner that we respect and promote these goods, and when we deny one, the other one is denied, and that means that one of them cannot grow if the other one doesn't grow. So it has to be said that this spousal project wants to make both these goods grow, and the project means that there has to be a free exercise of your willpower, and we have to look into the most suitable means to carry this out. Of course, this requires science, and it also means that you have to be cautious or prudent, and you also need to know what conjugal life is all about, and for that you need to have knowledge in the sphere of love, which we've already spoken about before, this morning, for instance. And also we have to talk about fecundity in its broadest possible sense, but it's also from a biological perspective. But what is clear is that we're not going to be talking about these actions that intrinsically damage these goods, in other words, fertility or love. And obviously, it wouldn't be very prudent to go ahead with that. But in any case, we're talking about many other options that should be valued in each context, so that we can discern what's going on, to see what it is we are supposed to do on a daily basis. And in the case of fertility, and well, from a biological perspective, we're talking about something very specific. We're talking about a periodic continence, or about the recognition of fertile moments to conceive a child, if we're strictly talking about the biological side of things. Although, well, this means that these actions could be good or worse, or can be better or worse, well, according to the vital situation of the spouses. So the spouses, both of the spouses, configured this mutual gift that they have to look after, that they have to respect, and that they have to make grow in a responsible manner. And obviously both of them had to do this. So these elections, well, they have to choose. It's they who have to deliberate and judge together, those who discern. And they have to look into the reasons that make them take one decision or another in relation to this important element, that obviously nobody can say that fertility is not an important issue, and especially biological fertility, which is related to your offspring. And of course, there's no doubt about it, because this applies to all human beings, because all human beings, or any human being, is worth more than the entire universe. So this is, I think, a very straightforward issue, and that is a preparation for conjugal life requires prior training that I believe is necessary in the area of love, in other words, psychology, human relations, and learning and maturing, as well as in the area that has to do with the fertility of the spouses. And I'm not sure if Joaquin is here, but in any case, it runs along the lines of what you were saying in the training that you provide to your students. But now, continuing with these premises, what is clear is that I believe that it's also necessary to know about the biology, and because that means that you'll be able to address any complex situations much better in people's lives. And here we could also say that from an ethical point of view, there's a right and a duty to receive that information. And if I, for instance, if I want to open a university, I need to have knowledge, and I need to have resources. And if I want to build a family, I also need those elements. And in the case of fertility, well, I need to know the biological bases that are important for psychology, how to look after psychology, how to recognize psychology, to procreate, and to space or to separate births. And then training on fertility is, for me, not only convenient but also necessary in certain stages of your conjugal life. So, having said this, I was asking myself, who is supposed to receive this education, with what contents, and when and where? Well, firstly, I would like to talk about what we could call a generic education, something that is not close to the married couple. Well, in principle, everybody should be told about this, about the biological basis and the different types of natural fertility awareness. And of course, this has to be done gradually in terms of subject matters, and this depends on the educational state, because Joaquin before was explaining that, well, that certain details are not addressed because it's not the right moment. So you have to be very cautious, and you have to know where you have to stop. And perhaps sometimes, well, there are things that are much more specific for the boys and things that are more specific for the girls. There has to be an ethical and biological training on human love. Well, everybody has to be responsible for this process, and They have to be informed about fertility, and well, this is the fertility that is present in men and women. But continuing along these lines, and well, now this has to do with well, the stage of adolescence and when you're young. Well, the youngsters recognize the meaning, or they try to understand what human sexuality is all about, and from an ethical perspective, the behaviors that oppose those meanings, well, they have to discover the biological reality of fertility simultaneously. And this is something that I think it's necessary to assess what we have inside this concept, and also for self-care that was mentioned previously. You need to know what kind of behaviors could pose obstacles for that fertility, and how we can learn how to respect it so that we can do this once we get married in our marital life. Well, let's say that these are the conclusions, together with the anthropological and medical and ethical components. And perhaps this is something that can be done, but in any case, it's necessary for our future spouses. And you have to choose whether you want to engender or not. And it's necessary to have a basic knowledge on how to do this. You cannot only explain the ethics, but then you need to know how this can be carried out. And let's say that this is a training before getting married. And you have to do that because if not, it's very difficult to achieve the integral educational elements. And all of them, before that, should have knowledge on the natural fertility methods. And I think that this is something that has to be taken seriously, because this has positive consequences, many positive consequences. And, well, if they do exist, I suppose that we will have to activate things, we'll have to get moving, because this eliminates factors that could then make conjugal life difficult, because normally when there's ignorance, or when there's uncertainty or fear, and what this produces is inadequate decisions. Why? Because let's say that people start having prejudices in relation to these methods, and they reject them. And all of this means that when we value them as a real and feel possibility, it's something that can be applied so that you can experience responsible fatherhood in a future marriage. And it's also important for all of those involved in education, and here I've mentioned the pastoral agents, but it could be people of, well, any kind of educator, or, well, those people that have to give advice, well, obviously need to have training in these methods. And finally, and to conclude, well, the positive consequences, I think that the most important conclusions, if they are capable of doing this gradually with greater intensity and during the stage of youth, I think that we can make it clear that the fertility of future spouses is a reality that they will have to experience together, and they will have to share as a husband and wife, and that we will also be favoring mutual respect and responsibility between man and woman, which is something that I believe is a very important issue, because if this always reminds me of Cain and Abel. And that is violence between men, violence against themselves, but is even more terrible, even in this diversity between men and women. There's a struggle, there's a fight between both of them. Should provide this training, and where? Well, the educational framework can be analyzed, of course. We've already spoken about this. We should provide more biological information. And there's an issue here that is somewhat difficult to solve. There's a knot that we have to undo, which has to do with not associating contraception here to any of this, or to these natural fertility awareness methods. And so we shouldn't mistake this with contraception. And contraception, well, when understood from the Christian ethics point of view, is something that has a specific conjugal context. And this is very important because sometimes, well, outside that area, you can talk about contraception or anti-conception or contraception, but this is not what we understand from the point of view of Christian ethics. But here, and I think that, well, perhaps some of you have already wondered if certain youth, certain youngsters could be trained so that they could use this in a non-conjugal context. I think that that is highly improbable, and it's not relevant from an ethical point of view either. So I think that this has nothing that has any special value attached to it, although it would be good to provide training that includes knowledge on fertility, but it has to all be done with this context of periodic continence. And now I'm going to focus on preparation for an upcoming marriage. And Pope Franciscus, in Amoris Laetitia, in his exhortation, says that Christians or people of goodwill should be able to achieve should envisage the attractiveness of a full union, which improves the social dimension of our existence. And this has to be done especially when we're talking about proximity or closeness. But when we're talking about closeness, we're also talking about preparation of the previous stages when you're dating. And I think that we have to be much more practical in our training. The recognition or the awareness of fertility has to be a very important element, and also the experience of other married couples on how they have experienced this or the things they've gone through in terms of responsible fatherhood or motherhood. Because perhaps here I'm taking a position, you might agree or disagree with me, but sooner or later all married couples have to space out their offspring. Well, because this can be due to multiple circumstances. Some of them are more serious as time goes by. Life is a very complex business, or you have to adjust these relationships so that they can be fertile. And here what I'd included was a question mark, and that is an inconvenience. Well, there are people that think that, okay, well, it seems that in the field of when you're going out or when you're dating, you start to consider these things. But, well, anyway, everybody is free, people are responsible, and they have to take decisions in this respect. So, you have to explain what life is like and also provide them the necessary means and instruments. And I don't think that there's any inconvenience related to this. And, they need to have certain skills and certain competencies, because I don't know if you agree with this or not, but I think that it's not good to resort to these methods once a couple has a problem, because that's when it becomes much more difficult to implement this, because there's no prior experiences, there's lots of fear, and there can even be certain habits that hinder periodic continence in a conjugal life where there has not been a dialogue, nor has there been a mutual involvement of the spouses, and especially in the case of the husband in relation to conjugal fertility.
Who should give this teaching? Well, it should be somebody with humanistic and biomedical training, both in the grade and form training of specialists. And this teaching is interesting for many specialties. It can also be delivered in basic sciences and also in more specific studies of gynecology. And a final comment. The first thing I wanted to say is that the methods are linked with the health of the woman. So the biomedical professionals can be delivering those courses and learn within these courses. Any knowledge can be used inadequately, of course, but it doesn't exclude the offer given by a family institution. It's a great progress that gynecologists had in their consultations will support it by other physicians or other personnel, because the people who would like to live this style, this mode of administering and deciding that's good of fertility, it's good, but would it be good for them to have someone to resort to? There is some teaching as well where they conceptualize in the biomedical setting that those methods have as a primary goal that the spouses do recognize their fertility and they act freely and with responsibility. We should generate more healthcare institutions that could deliver those services in a continuous fashion. I have been guided. I practically never use arguments from the church. It's not what I usually do. But this has been one of the texts that has inspired this idea. John Paul II says that we have to have an educational training capillary way of doing it. There is still a long way to go. Adequately of all the different aspects in the natural regulation of fertility, and talks about spouses and young people at large, and also people during the courtship. But all this together with this other one from the Pope Franciscus in Amoris Laetitia that has been about this issue. We have to promote the method based on natural rhythms of fertility. And he brings together several quotations because it's quite good. They respect the body of the spouses, encourage the love between them, and favor education, and insisting always in the fact that children are a fantastic gift from God, something that I believe is always at the center of all the teaching of the methods of fertility awareness. Thank you very much.